My next guest is a contributing writer to the Intercept, done a lot of great political reporting about this midterm elections and others. Please welcome Austin Ahlman. Austin, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So I want to turn to you to explain what the hell is going on in New York State. I think some people who are in and out of New York State know there was major redistricting that drew new lines, pitted politicians, current and former, mostly current, against one another, drawing them into the same district. And there's a lack of clarity as to why this happened and what does it mean. So I wanted, and we know that the New York primaries are coming up. So just can you explain how New York got into this moment that it's in with this redistricting kind of cluster F word?
Sure. So, I mean, the best way to think about it is that this is sort of the last lap of former Governor Andrew Cuomo. So what had happened was that Democrats had hoped to gerrymander New York, to be quite frank. I mean, gerrymandered it very egregiously, kind of as retaliation for things that have happened in Texas and Florida, et cetera, to hopefully, all together even out the map a little bit. What happened was, very unexpectedly, the Democratic-controlled Supreme Court struck down that gerrymander, and they did it so late in the game that it just caused this massive shuffle. And at the time, 6 of the 7 justices on the court had been appointed by Andrew Cuomo, and who's at odds with a lot of the members of the party. And he had even appointed some Republicans, but they were mostly Republicans, moderate Democrats who were unhappy with what the legislature had done in forcing Cuomo out. And it affected the state legislature too, not just the House of Representatives on the national level.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it really was sort of the last laugh of Andrew Cuomo in a really disturbing way. But it set off this just massive, unexpected battle as these lines came out, in the dead of night, right in the middle of primary season. Everybody had to ramp up their primaries in a matter of weeks, and it was just a mess.
I love that you're explaining that it's this like beyond the grave. Sort of, I mean, he is a Democrat, but he worked a lot with Republicans and kind of relied on them to prevent any real progressive change happening in New York. Can I ask you though, like just sort of on an objective level, as much as you can, do you feel like it was gerrymandered, that it was sort of unfair to say the fewer but the Republican voters in New York?
Sure. I mean, as far as the map was very egregiously gerrymandered. I think it was the Republicans were only going to have, I think, 4 of the almost 30 seats that New York holds tilt their direction, which is insane in a way, right? I mean, New York is very Democratic, but about 1/3 of the voters are still Republican, and they were not going to have anywhere close to 1/3 of the seats. So it really was a very gerrymandered map.
Okay. So now let's talk about who lost out when in this new map that. Actually, just tell me. So this map was drawn by a guy named Jonathan Service. Who the hell is this guy? Why was he the one redrawing the map? Usually it's like the legislature does it. This was farmed out to a map guy.
So he was called the special master. He's not necessarily a bad dude. He's very moderate. There's no really reason to think that he drew the lines in a way that's unfair per se. But he was appointed to draw the lines in conjunction with the court, and with the input of like relevant parties. They could file, briefs, whatever, to have their little bit of say. But really, it came down to his opinion. And the maps that he drew, they're not necessarily unfair. And I think it would be a little bit inaccurate to say that they're unfair as far as partisan balance and things like that go. But it just caused a mess because nobody knew until the 11th hour where they were going to run, and nobody knew what the considerations were in the drawing of these maps, because he had all the power and really it was his say, and really nobody else had much input that was very much valued.
Right. So everyone's scrambling, and again, like I mentioned, it's centrist versus centrist, progressive versus progressive. One of the districts pits Carol Maloney and Jerry Nadler, two sitting representatives who've been in office for many years, against one another. Neither of those 2 candidates are backing down, it seems. But I want to actually, I'm interested in Mondaire Jones, and who, sort of new member of the squad. This is congressional district number 17. openly gay, African American, progressive, and what is going on in District 17 and what is Sean Patrick Mahoney doing in that same district that actually has been forcing Mondaire Jones out?
So what happened was both of their homes ended up getting put in the same district. So even though most of the district that Sean Patrick Maloney moved into was previously represented by Jones, he said that his home was there, and Jones's home actually ended up just outside the district. And so if you go based off of who actually lives in the district,
right,
there's something to be said for having a claim there. But usually members of Congress defer to who actually represented the seat, who represented most of those constituents previously. And so kind of right after the maps dropped, Maloney decided to announce without even coordinating or speaking with Jones at all. And in fact, Jones tweeted about this and said, Sean Patrick Maloney didn't even give me a call before he announced for the seat that I currently represent, which tells you everything you need to know about him. And this was a big deal, right? This is the DCCC chair. He's in charge of protecting the majority. And what happened is on Sean Patrick Maloney's seat, it got more red-leaning as a result of the redistricting and the maps, frankly, getting a bit more fair. What I've understood, and my colleague Ryan Grimm has done some great reporting on this, is that Sean Patrick Maloney saw some polling that said that he was in trouble. And instead of thinking that he needed to do his job better as DCCC chair, he thought that, well, best to get off the sinking ship while I can, hop to Jones's district, which is a bit more favorable, and hope to force him into a primary with Jamal Bowman, who has a district just south of his.
Wow. So basically forcing Mondaire Jones to either run against Jamal Bowman or run against him, the head of the DCCC. Is that correct?
Yes. And so he had been prodded on. David Friedlander has some great reporting on this, that Mondaire Jones, even before the maps became finalized, was getting pressure from senior House Democrats to run against Jamal Bowman anyway. I'm guessing because the calculation is no matter who wins, the moderates in Congress win, right? There's one fewer progressive member of Congress from New York, no matter what. And so Mondaire Jones, sort of to his credit, sort of because, there's rumor that he saw polling showing that Bowman was going to beat him pretty handily. He just jumped ship altogether and is now running in Manhattan in the 10th district, which is nowhere near his current district, but was one of the few open seats on the map because with so many Democratic seats eliminated after the new round of redistricting, there weren't really many open seats to be had, but almost all of them had an incumbent or multiple incumbents.
That's crazy. That's crazy to me. And meanwhile, and Maloney's in, and because he's also like, I can't go against Maloney either.
Well, so we're talking about Jones?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's two Maloneys. I get a little confused.
Sean Patrick, not Carol, yeah.
The calculation there was, one, there was going to be a ton of outside spending. Sean Patrick Maloney is the DCCC chair. He has good relationships with all of the outside groups that are spending. There was fear that, the super PACs, especially the pro-Israel ones that have been just dumping money into these races, that they would have spent in that race. And then even if he had won, that seat's also a swing district and is trending right. So he would have had this bloody primary and then would have had to turn around after defeating a member that was more moderate and try to win in the general. So he had a tough calculation to make there, and there were no good options. But the one that he picked is also not great.
Insane. This is insane. The final thing on New York, and then I want to move on. So the 10th district where Jones is running, also Bill de Blasio, former mayor, is running in, as well as a current assemblywoman, Yulene Noy. Thoughts on that? Does it feel like de Blasio name recognition will trump?
So there already has been a poll of the race, which funnily enough shows that none of the voters know or like any of the candidates. Everybody's in single digits. The former mayor, Bill de Blasio, single digits. Mondaire Jones, also single digits. I think that de Blasio, frankly, is not going to be much of a factor. With his name recognition where it is, if he's already polling that low, I'm not sure what you're going to end up doing. I think that Yulene Neo could end up being a surprise. She's already starting to get some of the progressive endorsements in that race, which you would think that Jones would have first crack at. The Working Families Party endorsed her last week. And so really it's going to be a progressive versus a more progressive. So in a sense, that race ended up being okay.
And I know you've covered some of the redistricting crap and kerfuffle which has to happen, from time to time, but not always so chaotically as in New York. But can you just talk about maybe Illinois, since that primary is coming up on Tuesday, tomorrow?
Yeah, so Illinois is a little wild too. So what happened there was the Democratic majorities in both chambers, they gerrymandered the map. And really, they gerrymandered it to have more seats, but they could have drawn it to get the same number of seats that they did and kept every incumbent safe. But, pretty intentionally, it appears, they carved up Maureen Newman's district. So Maureen Newman unseated Dan Lipinski last cycle. Not a great Democrat, anti-choice, voted against the ACA. Not exactly the type of person you want in Congress. But the rule is, if you want to unseat an incumbent, you're on the list, right? So they chopped her district up and gave her the choice of running against Sean Casten, who's fairly progressive himself, and actually supported her run, or Chuy Garcia, who's also a very progressive member of a minority district next door. She didn't have a good calculation. Both are incumbents that have been there longer, so she's running against Casten now.
So in a sense, there was moderate Democrats kind of like carving up a progressive district, sort of knowing that they would knock one another out. Or
you almost can't get these lines without there being some intentional malicious behavior towards Newman specifically. It's if you go look at the map, I encourage listeners to go look at the map. The way that they draw these districts is just unbelievable, and it's hard to feel like it was anything other than intentional.
It's interesting to hear about Democratic gerrymandering for the first time. Any final thoughts on how you think this should be done generally?
I do believe that independent commissions are good. I do believe that in general, there's instances where it can go both ways. So in Oregon, for example, the new gerrymandered maps actually benefited progressives because the state house Democrats are a little bit more progressive there. But even that isn't great. I'm a big believer that we can go on offense while there's the ability to go on offense as a Democratic Party to, bolster progressives and whatnot. But in general, progressives are going to lose when Democrats go on the offense most of the time in gerrymandering.
Right, because it'll swing the other way. So maybe just leave it to, random map dudes like Jonathan.
Yeah. Maybe voters should pick their politicians and not the other way around.
Absolutely. Austin, Ahlman, everyone check out his work for The Intercept. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.